So, thank you for joining me on Bridging Minds, Gary. And I have your book, Dreaming Ahead of Time: Experiences with Precognitive Dreams, Synchronicity, and Coincidence. And I understand that your new book, or your upcoming book on Maurice Nicoll, the Forgotten Teacher of the Fourth Way, will also be released within, I believe, perhaps 2 more weeks, is my understanding.
Yes, in June in the States. I think July in the UK, or at least via Amazon. But it's coming out. Yeah, within the next month it'll be out.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's plunge right in. So,
Hmm.
your book, Dreaming Ahead of Time, is, from my understanding of reading it and the description, it's largely based on a lot of your personal reflections on your dreams. And if you wouldn't mind explaining the notion of a precognitive dream
Hmm. Hmm.
and how your personal dream work led you to explore these matters and write the book.
Well, the sort of impetus for the book came a few years ago now. I gave a talk here in London. There's a group that's called the Curious Invitation, and they do a lot of site-specific sort of talks. And they had a series called The Borderlands of Sleep. And this my talk was held in Brompton Cemetery. It's just one of these old, wonderful Victorian cemeteries in London. And I gave a talk about hypnagogia. And what's that? Well, it's this in-between state when we're falling asleep or waking up in the morning. There's some experts who split hairs, so it's hypnopompic when you're waking up. Hypnagogic, Greek words, hypno, sleep, gogias or gogias is a guide. So it's as you're guided in, as we metaphorically always think of it as going down into sleep. And then pomp, like pomp and circumstance, it's sort of the leader of the parade. So it's hypnopompic is when you're being led, again, metaphorically, being led up out of sleep. So I don't think there's vastly that much difference. In my own experience, if you want to explore these strange states of consciousness, in between consciousness, being able to linger longer in bed is preferable to trying to keep yourself awake as you're falling asleep, which generally you will have a bad night's sleep. So if you can do that, if you can sort of set your alarm clock, maybe an hour earlier than usual, and wake up and then drift back into sleep a little bit for a while. I myself find that's when I have the most vivid dreams. So, in any case, I gave a talk about this, and it's something that a variety of different people in the esoteric tradition, like Jung, Carl Jung, or Rudolf Steiner, and B.D. Uspensky, and Emanuel Swedenborg, and others have explored. And it's one you can explore yourself. But at the tail end of this talk, I tacked on a few accounts of my own experiences with this in between state, and
Hmm.
also some odd dreams I've had over the years, because that in between state is one in which it's conducive or prone to paranormal sort of experiences happen, and one that happens more often than not, at least statistically, according to all the studies, is some sort of precognitive dream. What's a precognitive dream? It's a dream in which bits and pieces of the future turn up ahead of time. So it's not necessarily, I mean, in the book, I sort of tell the difference between a precognitive dream and a prophecy and a premonition and a prediction. They all have the prefix to them. They all mean before something, but it's different. Precognition is knowing something before you know it,
Hmm.
it sounds illogical, or knowing something before you should have known it, or were able to know it. So a premonition is a feeling. Ooh, I got a bad feeling about that. And a prophecy is, I see this happening. A prediction is, I predict this will take place. The sorts of dreams that I'm talking about and that I've recounted in my dream journals for more than 40 years now, um, I started when I was 2 years old. That's a bad joke, but but in any case,
It's a
there
good
are
time to
ones
start.
I don't know that I don't wake. I never wake up thinking, oh, I've just dreamt the future. No, later on that day, or the next day, or
Mm,
maybe a couple of weeks or whatever. Oh my God, that happened in the dream. This is like exactly in the dream. And how I got onto doing this. Well, let me finish the story. I mean, giving the talk. The reason I tacked it on and what happened was that I said, look, if you want to experience this, just do what I did and basically just start writing down your dreams. Start writing
mm,
down your dreams. Pay attention to your dreams. Don't worry about trying to understand what they mean. I'm not saying they don't mean anything, but don't worry about that just yet. Just write
mm,
them down. And if you do that consistently over time, I would say you'll get a hit and you say, oh my God, that's and so on. So the next day when I went on to social media, onto Twitter, someone who had been at my talk, that the first tweet of the day that I saw was from a woman. I assume it was a woman,
mm,
who had been at my talk, and she said, "OMG!" and blah 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 blah. The exclamation points. It's true. I went to this talk. The guy said if I wrote down my dreams, I would see that I had dreamt the future, and she did. And what happened to her was that she dreamt that she had picked a hedgehog up off the road. Hedgehogs are these strange animals they have here in the UK. And they
prickly
picked up
thing.
this, yeah, yeah. So, and they picked it up off the road and put it onto the pavement, the sidewalk, that they call it the pavement here, to keep
Mm,
it out of the way so it wouldn't get run over. And she said, that was my dream. And the first thing I saw on my Twitter feed was a post about how to protect the hedgehogs.
mm,
And I said to her, like, well, oh, yep, I would say that's a bingo, but that's a dream that's subject to something that I call symbolic distortion, in which, um, yes, you dreamt that you picked a hedgehog up off the road and put it on the pavement, but you didn't actually do that. But the first thing that actually you saw, because the precognition, it's not like Criswell predicts, I see the future. It's what's going to happen to you. it's
mm,
it's your script. It's what you so you're seeing your own script ahead of time. And what she saw, the first thing was a tweet about how to protect the hedgehogs, and that's exactly what she did in her dream, was she protected the hedgehog. And I
mm.
suspect it would say, if you went to follow that link, it would say, and if you saw a hedgehog in the street, pick it up and put it on the pavement. So I thought, okay, and this was during the first lockdown, COVID. I mean, that was that was 2019. That was sort of it was October,
Mm.
and then so 2020. I thought, okay, I emailed my publisher and I said, look, I have an idea to write about a book about precognitive dreams, and I've been collecting them in my own journals for 40 plus years, and so they said, okay, go for it. So inspired by that woman's experience with the hedgehogs, I went and wrote the book, and my own experience with these sorts of dreams
Mm.
started, more than 40 years ago, when I was a musician, ages ago, when I was playing in the Blondie. You probably before you were born. I don't know. Maybe not. You're a bit gray,
Actually,
but
no, I grew up listening to Blondie, actually, and I'm always touched by your presence, dear. That song is related to your dream experiences, right?
oh, exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
mean
My mom used
that
to
was
play it all the time. That I'm always touched by your presence, dear. Rapture. She had this like little tape, the best of
all right,
Blondie, and
right.
it just like got
Oh yeah, yeah,
destroyed by the late '80s. But yeah,
yeah. Oh well, that's we play it to death. It's so,
right.
but yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Because back then, when that was, I was doing that. I was on tour, and my girlfriend at the time, she and we seemed to be having the same dreams at the same time,
Mm,
or we'd call each other at the same time. And this was back in the day before you had cell phones, so you had to, be in a phone booth at
right.
somehow. And I'm in the hotel room, and oh, whatever. Oh my God, I was just trying to call. Oh, I was just trying to call you. Blah, blah, blah. And so bang. So that happened enough times that I got inspired and wrote the song. I'm always touched by your presence, dear, which is, I think, it's the only top 10 hit that has the word theosophy in the lyrics. I think it should be in Guinness, but I don't know if it is. But in any case, so that happened a long time ago. And then around the same time, the reason I wrote that song, those experiences, and I was hip to them, is because I was reading all about this stuff. I started reading about the occult and the paranormal and magic and the mysticism and all that sort of thing. Around the same time I first started playing in Blondie. This would have been 1975, a long time ago, back in the day in New York, the New York underground rock and roll scene and all that. And a book I read then basically changed my life. It's a book by a British writer named Colin Wilson.
Oh
It
yeah.
was just a book called The Occult. And I mean, I read it was I was 19. It was all like, wow, man, I was just like, this is incredible. But it was just like a page turner.
Mhm.
And what was great about that book was that it wasn't just a book about spells and ghosts and stuff. Is that I didn't know, I found out later, but he had a whole, you know, 10 or 15-year history before that, writing about existentialism and phenomenology, and which I couldn't even pronounce at the time. And in any case, so that got me interested in all this sort of stuff. And then I had those experiences, or my first foray into the sort of thing later on. I've been doing now for 20 something years, it was a song rather than a book. But then I read a book at that around this time that was called An Experiment with Time.
Mhm.
And it was by a fellow named J.W. Dunn, who was an aeronautics engineer. And it was written in the 20s. And he just discovered by accident that he dreamt the future.
Mhm.
Right. And again, it's usually, although he gives some examples of like the volcano and some kind of dramatic event, 9 times out of 10, usually these precognitive dreams are about rather inconsequential sorts of things,
Mhm.
trivial sorts of things. There's a sort of thing that if it hadn't been a precognitive dream, you wouldn't have paid too much attention to the dream itself. So, but that's I tell you, and that's my own experience. And when I went back and read as much as I could about that, this is something that's been recorded by everyone else that's written about these things or had these experiences as far back as the early mid 19th century. There's a woman named Catherine Crowe who wrote a book called The Night Side of Nature. That's one of these classic um, 19th century accounts of weird stuff. But she even says all the accounts that she's ever come across of this, most of them, 90% of them, are about sort of trivial sorts of things. But then I just did what Dunn said, started writing down your dreams, and he was right.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Colin Wilson's The Occult. I read that book in the summer of 1985. I was like 11, going on 12,
Wow.
and it kind of changed my life too. I stumbled across it by accident, and it just blew my mind, and it took me down some weird paths, but that is fascinating. I've had a couple of experiences personally with precognitive dreams that I can remember. Like one wasn't trivial, but it concerned the death of someone. I dreamt of meeting that person, and they were taken away by these two strange, frightening beings, uh, disguised as my late aunt and my uncle. And I later found out that around it, and I was so vivid. I woke up, I wrote it down in a dream journal, um, that I also start keeping them. And it turned out this friend of mine passed away, like roughly about within 20 minutes of that dream, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't find out all into them. But that's actually what, like, when I start flipping through your book and reading it after I got it kind of struck a chord because uh, I've had experiences with hypnagogia, and I didn't know the difference between hypnagogia and hypnopompia. So it really resonated with me. It really resonated with me. Um, so you mentioned that often these states, this kind of like threshold or liminal state of presence, um, can often be associated with paranormal matters. That's something that you found in your research.
Well, yes, my Yes, I would say I've had there's precognitive dreams where you're dead asleep and you have a dream, and then there's sort of you're on this threshold sort of thing. And some of the examples that Dunn gave in his book Experiment with Time were sort of hypnagogic sorts of states rather than full on
Hmm.
sleep. And there's a book by a fellow named Andreas Mavromatis. It's called
Hmm.
Hypnagogia, and it's kind of like the one-stop shop, book for hypnagogia because he covered everything. And it's written academic in tone, and he himself, I've met him a few times, and he's written other things that are not quite as academic. He said, "Well, that was for my thesis and all that," but still, it's a remarkable book, and he covers everything you'd want to know about it. And
Wow.
he and he carried on a great deal of experiments in sort of group hypnagogia. We had a group together, and they would get into these in between states, and they seem to be having shared dream experiences. I mean, it's sort of I think what is it called? Lower ego boundaries or something like that. So your ego
Wow.
boundary, it's like if you think of it again, we can talk about these things metaphorically. It's just a
Hmm.
way to try to understand it. But usually we have a very sharp, kind of clear idea of our boundaries.
Hmm.
Like, okay, I'm here, there's me here, and there's that out there, and there's you there, and you feel pretty much the same way as me. There's you there, and there's it out there, and all that. But then you get into these liminal states. Liminal means on the border, um, and that becomes permeable. It's not quite clear, and that's what happens in these in between sleeping states or sleeping waking at the same sort of time. And the whole idea that you can have if it isn't the case that consciousness is just something that each of us somehow produces, the brain produces. So we got like some like a few drops of consciousness in there, a little puddle of it in our heads.
Right.
If rather than that, it's something that's shared in some way, and we in our own experience, the ego is like a tight knot of it that's gathered together purposely to to move through this. But then when you relax, it opens up, and so something along those lines. So
Hmm.
I'm more along that rather than like there's just this
Hmm.
stuff in my head and that's it. Um,
All right.
when that you get into those sort of relaxed states, so it's shared and there's sort of an opening. And Mavromatis talks about yes, sort of being able to direct
Hmm.
imagery that people we were all sort of sharing when they were in this in between sort of similar. And I've tried done a bit of that. I mean, on my own, but also with groups. I mean, a couple of years ago,
Hmm.
I invited to the Pari Center, which is this wonderful place in Italy. Pari, not gay Pari, but Pari,
Right.
Pari. It's in Tuscany, and it was started by F. David Pete, who was a physicist, and he was a colleague of David Bohm of
Ah,
Wholeness and
okay.
the Implicate Order, and then he carried on a lot of Bohm's work and developed a lot of those themes on his own, and he started this center,
Hmm.
which is still going on. But in any case, I was invited out there, and what I gave a talk about the book about the precognitive dreams and all that. But part of it also was sort of the workshop where I had people lying on mats, and I,
Hmm.
I I did two sessions. One I played shakuhachi, Zen shakuhachi flute music in the background,
Hmm.
and the other I just had sort of white noise or wave sort of thing. The idea was to try to drift into a half, sleep state, which I
Okay.
jokingly say most of my talks induce in my audience anyway. Uh,
I'm sure not, though.
but I think it worked because it was very hot. This was a couple summers ago, and it was like 90 degrees or whatever there. So any case, but people did it seemed, when we all sort of collated, okay, some people didn't have anything, some people just fell asleep, but some people did have some imagery. And it seemed that the
Hmm.
imagery did line up. So, I mean, it's a place you can't, I don't think, well, I was going to say, can you make it happen? I guess that's what magicians do. But I think you can create the conditions in which it may happen.
Kind of something propitious to it and that allows it to flow, if it will flow, in that sense.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Or
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of
I
like
mean, yeah.
maybe.
If you're at one of these gatherings too, so this is there were lots of other people giving talks, and we all ate together. So you do that for a week. You do. your ego boundaries break down, and especially after you have quite a lot of the excellent Italian wine they were serving and the food, so your ego boundaries break down, and
Mm.
you start to meld and all that. So I mean, I think the sort of thing is, if people, and I know people do, but if you pay attention, you just write
Mhm.
your dreams down and pay attention to stray thoughts and
Right.
well, that kind of thing, you would see that this sort of stuff happens more often than, or that it is happening, but we tend not to pay attention to it for a
So,
variety of reasons.
do you think is the act of writing it down somehow maybe a signal to your mind or your consciousness or to the source of these dreams that to kind of pay more attention? Do you think this is something that people are experiencing more often than they realize, and that's just sort of a trigger to tune in a sense?
Well, I no, I think you're right. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but Jung says somewhere that if you sort of pay attention to the unconscious, it notices.
Yeah.
And I only thing I would say is I would turn the it into I don't know what pronoun we would use because to me it's become more of a who than a what, in a sense, and more than it belonging to me. I think I'm an,
Mm-hmm.
ex an extension of it, and I'm trying to connect with whatever who what it may be. But yes, I think writing your dreams down, um, if nothing else
Hmm.
I think it does communicate to the source of the dreams, what or whoever that may be, that
Right.
you're interested and you're paying attention. I mean, I again, we only talk about these things sort of metaphorically, but I always think of it as a shy person that you would like to make a friend of. And you have to sort of
Mm.
approach them in a certain way.
Right.
And, they're skittish, they may back off, very quickly, but no, just have to sort of, make tell them somehow communicate you're interested and like that, and keep at it, and then it'll happen. And it's also I know my own experience of
Hmm.
writing down my dreams is you go through dry patches where you don't remember anything, or your dreams are really boring. They're just nothing
Right.
more than just an extension of your everyday thinking because you whatever you're fretting about stuff too much. But then you get the ones that are deeper,
Hmm.
and uh you could have a lucid dream experience, or you could have like a very very powerful, what Jung would call an archetypal experience, where the whole
Mm.
the dream scenario is very dramatic and
Right.
full of symbols and all that. So, but yeah, it's I think it's a process of developing a communication, and again, it spills
Mm.
over into the waking world as well. So you have the phenomenon of
Hmm.
synchronicity.
Right.
Jung's sort of quasi-scientific term for meaningful coincidence.
Right.
When something going on up here and something going on out there
They
lines
connect.
up so you know indubitably that you start thinking, who arranged this for this to
Right.
happen, so that's but
Mm.
so, no, I mean, again, I think if you pay attention to your experience, you'll find more and more that happens.
I wonder if things like synchronicity or even the phenomena, these kind of liminal state phenomena uh, that you write about and that people experience, maybe they're sort of invitations to pay attention more than perhaps.
Well,
Uh,
I guess, yeah, I tend to well, again, I tend to think of it again metaphorically, sort of almost a guardian angel, and I just say that not in this, not a
right.
particular, in a sense, like a tap on the shoulder sort of thing. I mean, like Jung sort of wanted to come up with this sort of quasi-scientific, not explanation, but sort of definition of it, because he,
Mhm.
uh, understandably, I mean, he was a scientist in the sense that he was a psychiatrist and psychologist and all that, and the doctor, but he was exploring realms that were considered verboten by most of his colleagues.
Right. Yeah.
But he himself every now and then lets slip, and it's like
Mhm.
somehow there's some kind of spiritual agency, like a
Mhm.
related phenomena to synchronicity, or something that participates in synchronicity, or we could even call it kind of directed synchronicity, is the I Ching, the
Hmm.
ancient Chinese
Mhm.
oracle.
Right.
I mean, where I mean, it starts out with the yarrow stalks and all that, but
Mhm.
luckily someone developed this more easier way. We just throw the coins down, and if you know what it is, it's basically you can take three pennies, or or whatever, just three of the same coin, and if you have all heads, you have a sort of solid line. If you all have all
Mhm.
tails, it's a broken line, and so on. And you throw these things six times, and they create what they call a hexagram, and then you get your copy of the I Ching, and there's many different ones, but there's the Richard Wilhelm translation, which is the one that Jung wrote an introduction to, and I've been
Mhm.
using that one for many years. And you look it up, and you've asked a question,
Mhm.
and you know the hexagram will provide an answer to it. And in my own experience, I've been using that thing, that thing. I've been communicating, communing with whatever is responsible, or whatever intelligence is behind the I Ching for many years now. And I'm convinced that the same intelligence that's behind dreams, or the same intelligence that's behind synchronicities and meaningful
Mhm.
coincidences, is behind the I Ching. And it's the same way you can have more direct, you can have actually kind of a direct communication with it in a certain way.
Mhm.
And one of the things I write about in the book is that the reason I've come to believe that,
Mhm.
I don't know how to explain it. I don't ask me how to explain it. I'm not trying to convince
It's just
anybody,
kind of
but
ineffable.
somehow that, well, it's not even ineffable. It's just like it's just there. No, it isn't ineffable. It's just like, well, somehow there's an intelligence inherent in the book, or inherent in the act of my
Hmm.
consulting the book. Something happens between the book, my consulting it, and whatever powers that be. But the reason I'm saying all this is that there's a particular hexagram. I think it's Meng, and I think it's number 4, and it's called Youthful Folly. And it's the one you get if you ask the same question twice.
Hmm.
You, basically says, you ask me once, that's fine. I've given you an answer. If you ask me
Mhm.
twice, you're importuning me. And,
Uh,
I don't say anything. And it's actually, so I've got that on more than one
hmm.
occasion, when, as we often are, when we're not
Mhm.
satisfied, when we're in a particular, psychological state, emotional state, and you,
Right.
damn those tarot cards, give me the reading I want, So, but this, it basically saying, hey, look, Bub, I've told you once already. That's the answer. Don't ask me again. And I've had that enough times where I just felt like, okay, there's some intelligence involved here. So what that may
Hmm.
be, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Somehow my own unconscious is involved in it in some way. That's, how that is, I don't know, but that's, one thing I would say must be happening there some way. And you can start to bring in, quantum physics and all that, the observer and the observed, and
Mhm.
we collapse the wave function by observing the elementary particles and so on. And Jung kind
Hmm.
of wants to do that. But I just feel, maybe, I don't know, but it seems much more personal to me. I don't know what a wave function knows about my own personal life. And I'm asking, usually we go to these things when we have a desperate question. We're up against, a rock and a hard place, as it were. And so you're consulting the oracle. What should I do? So I don't know what elementary particles, what they could possibly know about my own personal life. So somehow the idea that maybe some spiritual agency that said, let me see what I can do. Again, I'm talking about it in this kind of offhand way, because I think that's I'm not trying to convince anybody that there's spirits at work, but it strikes me that there's some intelligence, and like
Mhm.
intelligence you have, or I have, anyone else has, better, but around the same way. So
Yeah.
what does that mean? I don't know, but that's my experience. That's why the book, the subtitles, is experiences with these things. I mean, I'm not trying to come up with a theory to explain them. In fact, I personally think that's the wrong approach. We shouldn't explain them.
Hmm.
There's something that pops through, that perforates
Hmm.
our, neat little understanding of things, and kind of says, yeah, but what about this? So I tend to think of it that way. they're invitations to
Right.
broaden your outlook. They're invitations, as you were saying. Do you think there's
Hmm.
somehow a calling? So there's something along those lines. I might say yes.
Hmm. So it's something that's more that's best experienced and not theorized about in a sense. Then,
Well, I mean, if you experience
in
them
like,
and then think like, well, what was that all about? I mean, yeah, that's both. You know, for me, it's like
hmm,
it's food, it's material for thinking, but at the same time, I don't want to explain it away. Or put it this way, I
hmm,
mean, last year, I was invited to give a talk and participate. There's something called How the Light Gets In Festival.
huh,
And
sounds cool.
it's something that's put on by there's a group called the Institute of Arts and Ideas or something like that. And I forget what the theme was, but they had it was kind of like there's scientists and kind of the uh, scientists that are open to the paranormal or the spiritual or something like that. And there was a bit of so I mean Rupert Sheldrake, you probably know
Yeah, yeah.
who he is and all
His work
that.
is
So
fascinating.
he was paired up with somebody else, and they kind of went and and at it and Ian McGilchrist, who did this remarkable book, Master and His Emissary, which I think
Hmm.
I do mention in Dreaming Ahead of Time, where he reboots the whole left and right brain kind of story that had been put on the shelf for a while, and so on. So I was invited along as well, and I gave a talk about the book, and then I did a few things, but one of the things I was doing was another pair up with sort of like I think it was like philosopher of mind or something like that, and I think the other person was a sociologist, and then whatever. Um, I was the guy who used to be in a rock band, and
Writes fascinating books.
and he writes all this stuff, this weird stuff now. Uh, but any case, there was some theme about our experience being is our experience subjective, somehow, or is
Hmm.
it shared? Do we somehow share blah blah blah? And I started saying, well, in some ways, absolutely it is. I've had many experiences of shared dreams and blah 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 blah, and then kind of just as like the guy, oh well, I don't know. The scientist starts saying, I know, I'm sure you felt
Hmm.
that you had a precognitive experience. And I said,
Right.
no, no, sorry, I didn't feel, no, I felt awe and wonder at once again having another precognitive dream, but I actually have a
Hmm.
whole, I can bring the stacks of journals here over the
Right.
years. But the thing was, once that kind of got going, the moderator kind of shut it down.
Interesting.
So I didn't really want to have that kind of sort of thing. So I think by all means, let us direct our, rational minds and our powers of inquiry into these phenomena, but let's accept that they
Hmm.
happen in the first place
Right.
and not either
Right.
deny that they happen or try to explain them away.
I guess the
So
perception comes first, perception of the experience comes first and then exploring it more, but just
well,
realizing
I
it
mean,
happens.
from my experience of that and others like that, if you have what you call, I don't know, the hardcore scientists, the very tough-minded, as William James, the great American psychologist, would have called them, and scientists and philosopher. They just the facts, folks. Dragnet, just the facts, man, just the facts, and all that, and everything else that has any kind of sense of meaning or quality or you know it's considered just subjective in the sense that that's just again it just takes place in that little puddle of consciousness inside our
Right.
head. So it's got nothing to do with the real world. We have to subtract that in order to get at the real world. But my approach is what you would call, as I said before, I couldn't pronounce it earlier when I was first reading about this stuff, phenomenological, meaning
Mm-hmm.
that you just accept the phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
You don't try to explain it. You don't try to say, could it happen? Could it not happen? Is it possible? Is it not possible? Since
Mm-hmm.
this is what is taking place, so in my own experience, and as I said, I started I started writing my dreams down, sort of what's the, sort of regularly as a conscious practice in 1980. So this
Hmm.
is like, 44 years now, off and on, different times I, couldn't do it. But and I've been doing it now at least 10 years again. But when I wrote the book, I went back to dream journals from the 80s and the 90s and all that, and collected the rich harvest of
Right.
precognitive dreams that I have in one chapter. So again, it's there. This is and the one knockdown one for me. I mean, and I don't know if you got up to that one in the book, is where I dreamt two scenes and the plot of a film 4 years in advance of seeing the film. There's a film, The Shadow, Alec Baldwin, and it was made 1994, and
Right.
The Shadow is this 1930s pulp, kind of character with, has a mask and a gun, and who knows what evil lurks in the
Right.
hearts of men. The Shadow knows.
Yeah.
And
Cheap
so,
and yeah.
yes, and so in 1990, I had a dream about a film about this character, and I had known the character. I grew up reading, when I was a kid in the '60s and teenager in the '70s, all that pulp stuff from the '30s and the
Hmm.
'40s was, repackaged. So I
Right.
read all that stuff when I was a kid. So, but I wrote the dream down, 1990, and there were two scenes. One scene was the shadow. He has one of the powers he has is that he can become two-dimensional, like a real shadow on the wall, and then he steps
Hmm.
out of the wall and becomes 3D. So I dreamt a scene like that, and then a scene where he has his 45 is like his trademark kind of gun,
Hmm.
and
Right.
there's a scene where it's just a 45 and it's reflected in all these sort of crystals and prisms around it, right?
Right. And I
And
remember that scene
okay,
vividly. Yeah.
okay, so all right, so you saw the film. Okay, all right, okay, all right. And then okay, so in the dream, the plot revolved around the bad guys doing something with a sphere of some kind. Okay, fast forward 4 years later, 1994. I'm living in LA, and I see, they've got this film. So I tell my wife at the time, hey, you remember because we were together for a while. I said, remember I had that dream a long time ago? And I showed it the journal 4 years earlier, 1990. We go to the movie, both of those scenes, exactly. So you might think, okay, that's what he does. So any film about him is going to have him coming out of the wall, and any film about him is going to have that. But not any film about him is going to have a plot
Mhm.
revolving around a sphere, and that's what's in the film. It's like they're going to blow up New York with a beryllium sphere. So
Yeah.
I just thought, I mean, for me, I don't know. That just said like, okay, whatever reason why I got that info ahead of time, I don't know, but somehow I got that 4 years in advance. So
Mhm.
that to me is the sort of main attraction in that chapter. But there's all other ones as well. So that's just my experience. My experience has been
Right.
such. So my
Right.
experience is that the world is such where these sorts of things happen. Okay.
Hmm.
How they happen, why they happen, I don't know, but they happen. And I'm interested in happening
Right.
more. And I sort of I want to find out like
Right.
what's behind it, but I don't want to explain it away, you know.
Right.
Oh, it's nothing but this. So that the reaction of the fellow I was paired with at this festival last year was like, oh, no, 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 that can't possibly be the case because
Mhm.
we know you can't dream the future. So it must have been this.
Right.
And I think, no, no, no. As you said before, I think all these things are invitations to us to like broaden our horizons.
Right.
As the Russian philosopher Peter Uspensky, who is very interested in dreams and
Mhm.
time and all this, said he said, think in other categories. This
Mhm.
is one of the things he took back from experiments he made with nitrous oxide in like the early 20th century,
Mhm.
um, like 1905 or something like that, where we go into mystical states, and he in those sorts of states he got into, everything
Mhm.
was he saw everything was connected.
Right.
So everything was, but you once you start to say one thing, you have to say everything, and then that's when it becomes ineffable. You can't,
Mhm.
and then you come back down from the heights, and he found scrawled on a piece of paper, thinking of the categories. But that's what
Mm.
I would say all these sorts of things are. Maybe there's some intelligence behind it in some way, trying to draw us. It may be even be ourselves, some our deeper selves in some way, trying to communicate to ourselves in these sort of ways
Mhm.
to open up.
Hmm.
So I don't know.
It's interesting. I noticed because it'll come and go for me, but I've started experiencing sort of hypnagogic oddities over the last 2.5, 3 weeks. And I noticed, it's happened back and forth for years, but when I feel like I'm kind of drifting, and this what you said about, explaining away reminded me of this. I notice if I try to focus on something, it just goes away. And then it's
Mm,
like you're out of it. You're out of that state,
mm,
and it's like,
mm.
okay, I'm lying in my bed, blah, blah. Then you're drifting
Yeah.
back again. There's something fascinating, and I like if I try to like grab it or chase it or just focus on it, it goes away. But if you're just kind of drifting and you're just, it's like looking at something out of focus. It'll
Mm.
it'll stay with you. Maybe there's kind of
Well, this isn't it?
a
Isn't it the brain waves? Which is it? When you sort of, it's like when you're kind of, I forget what it is, the data when you're just drifting. But once you go like that, again,
Hmm,
metaphorically, you're going to
right.
grab something, and it makes sense. In order to grab something, you have to let go of all the other stuff. So no, I agree with you. I tend to have it's peripheral. It's almost as
Hmm,
if you kind
right,
of like it's what do you see on the sides, and you don't you're sort of looking in the
right.
middle distance. You're not necessarily looking at anything in particular. It's what they call the middle distance, and it's sort of on the sides. And
Hmm,
I get most of it as yeah, if I and especially it's this time of year too here in London because the sun comes up at I don't know 4:45 or something in the morning, and then
hmm,
I'm seasonal. As soon as the light starts to come in, I wake up, and
right.
then I can drift back to sleep for another hour or two, a couple hours, and it's then, and it
Hmm,
tends to be the lighter sleep. You're in REM, but it's
right.
not it's not the deep one. It's a lighter one, and I've had the oddest dreams then. I mean, it become lucid, or you have very very kind of dreams in which figures in the dream communicate more than
Hmm,
other times, so what I mean. Sometimes you have dreams where you're
right.
with
Yeah.
people, but it's kind of I'm just with some people. It's vague, and then there's other
Hmm.
dreams in which there's
So
a
it's
particular person there, and they're saying something to you very clearly. And so, I mean, I had one not too long ago with a very good friend of mine who passed away a couple of years ago,
uh,
and then he was in the dream, and I said to him, "Oh, wait, hold on a second, James, you're dead." He said, "Yeah, yeah, I know, but it doesn't matter." And it was like, and I kind of felt like,
to
we just
me.
sort of like
Uh,
drifted. Oh, hey, hey, I bumped
all right.
into, he's on his way somewhere in the astral. And I just kind of like, ooh, drifted past him quickly, said, hey, hey, but again, why not? Why not? And it had
Yeah.
that, what I call the crackle of reality, this kind of
Hmm,
real, you know, kind of, that's the other thing too. I mean, those powerful dreams, they're more real than reality often. That's
yeah.
if you ever have
Yeah.
those ones where it's like it's
Yeah.
hyper real
Oh
around
yes.
you, and it's like every little you see every little vein in the leaf, and
Right.
every little twinkle of the when you have those, that's like it's somehow you start to think like what Uspensky again, he
Mhm.
talks about the dream artist who's able to create a kind of unreal reality in the sense of in the dream, but it's with such incredible kind of what do you want to say? Texture and HD and three
Texture.
and all that stuff
Yes.
doesn't
Yeah.
come close to that kind of thing. I don't know about you, but I've come out of some of those dreams. You feel like, where the hell was I just then? That was like,
Yeah. I, I
where
know totally.
where was
Mhm.
I? And I
Right.
felt that that has to be either some real place, or if not, how do I get in touch with that creative source that's able to and it just pops up. I'm not there thinking, "Oh, I want that." I mean, we can do that. There's all those practices where you can learn how to direct your lucid dreams, and there's some controversy about
Mhm.
that because if the dream is a kind of product of some part of yourself that's not your conscious ego. That's, you know, that's actually trying to communicate with the conscious ego. To have the conscious ego start to control the dream, then you sort of turn the dream into something that you want
Right.
rather than, you know what I mean? So there's some,
Yeah.
but in any case, but that, I mean, that's yeah, I mean, that's what is that incredible reality that you enter into in the dream states, you know?
Yeah. It's something that's hyper real. It's an incredible reality. It feels more real than real. So it's like there isn't just in our heads, or that it feels like there has to be something out there that we're tapping into. It's
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, and the whole idea that you could be in different states of consciousness at the same time, too. I mean, I didn't write about it in the book. I wanted to, but in the end, I took it out because I couldn't quite fit it in. But I've had experiences of what's called sleep paralysis.
Mhm.
So when you're in, it's often hypnagogic state's often like that too. So you're falling asleep, and then in order to sleep, truly sleep, our muscles go torpid. Basically, they just
Mhm.
kind of get all floppy and loose.
Right.
And apparently, this is some evolutionary adaptation going way back. So because our ancestors, animal ancestors, if they acted out the dreams, they would
Mhm.
attract predators.
Mhm.
So if you're asleep, but you think you're whatever,
Mhm.
rolling around in the grass and having a wonderful time, ooh,
Right.
the nocturnal predator hears you and comes gets you. So you, and this is an interesting point. I think this is a very interesting point. I don't know. I mean,
Mhm.
I tried to bring it up in the book, and I don't know if anybody else it has, but that strikes me as even evolution or blind Darwinian evolution somehow decided that you have a choice here, right? You,
Mhm.
there's two things, right? You have dreaming, and then you can have the dream, but if you act out the dream, you're going to attract, the predator, right? So you got
Mhm.
a choice there. You could either get rid of the dream, right, and you don't have the problem at all, or you have to come up with something that allows you to have the dream without getting eaten, right? So that's
Right.
the muscles going torpid. So somehow even blind Darwinian evolution was dream friendly. Think about. I think this is an important point. Why? Because you would think, hey, let's get rid of the
Mhm.
dream. that's
Right.
that's causing the trouble. If you didn't have the dream, you wouldn't move around, you wouldn't attract the predator. But no, no, no. Somehow the dream is important. So let's make the muscles go torpid, which even really makes you even more defenseless, right? Because you can't move. You actually are
Right.
paralyzed.
But it's
Right. So this
prioritizing something that makes you more defenseless in favor of the dream state.
well, I mean, if you think about Darwinian evolution, it's like, it's some adaptation that's favorable,
Mhm.
right, to your survival, right? So
Right.
at that point, and again, we're speaking metaphorically because in Darwinian evolution, there's no intelligence behind it.
Right.
It's purely mechanical. It's chance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Chance,
Yeah.
chance mutations uh, that are favorable or non-favorable in allowing the organism to survive under the pressures of the environment. Okay,
Right.
right. So you got a choice. Again, metaphorically, you have a choice there. If you get rid of the dream state, which
Mhm.
science even today tells us is just nothing. It's just, it's pointless. It's rubbish. It's just the brain is computer clearing its, whatever.
Right.
It's getting rid of data it doesn't need anymore. Junk stuff, right? So let's just get
Mhm.
rid of the whole thing, and that way you won't move around, you won't attract the predator. You don't need to be paralyzed, which is what the evolution came up with. It's like, let's paralyze you while you're asleep so you can have the dream and not move around, right? So we're making you even more defenseless because you're paralyzed now. So if the predator does happen to come upon you, what? No, no,
Yeah.
this is when you think about it, it's just like
Yeah.
that shouldn't happen
It
according to Darwinian
doesn't make
evolution. That
sense.
just shouldn't be, that's obviously shouldn't happen. So somehow it was dream friendly. The dream needed to be protected. The dream state needed to be protected. Hence, we become paralyzed when we go into
Mhm.
the deep, REM sleep.
Right.
And many people have this. I know I have it. If I fall asleep at night on my back, I will wake up, I'll be conscious, but I can't move.
Mhm.
I'm completely, and when I was married years ago, my wife, and um, there was one episode where I'm falling asleep on my back.
Mhm.
I'm awake in the sense that I know I'm asleep, lying on my back, but I can't move. But
Right.
I'm dreaming at the same time that I'm somehow battling off some strange character that, the
Hmm.
hag or wherever it is that wants to.
Right.
But I'm also conscious that my wife is looking over at me, like she's looking at me like, oh, what's happening, honey? I'm trying to say to her, shake me, shake me. If you just kind of, if when you're in that state, if
Hmm.
anybody just touches you, you go like that, and the paralysis will go off.
Right.
But she doesn't, but in the dream itself, I'm actually gesturing to her like this.
Hmm. Right.
I'm not verbally saying it, but because if you try to talk, oftentimes you're like that if you're trying to talk in a dream because you're
Right.
paralyzed. So, any case,
Hmm.
but I was in about three different states of consciousness at the same time. I was asleep in a dream. I was in between asleep and awake, and I was also awake but paralyzed. And my conscious efforts to tell my wife to shake me, I was trying to say
Hmm.
it verbally, were echoed in the dream with a gesture. I gestured in the dream
Oh,
to do that. And so it's like,
right.
so the whole idea that somehow, consciousness is something that's just produced by the
Hmm.
brain. So how did it produce three different states of consciousness at the same time? You know,
Right.
and somehow there was a me and I that was in all of those simultaneously. And I mean, I
Right.
wrote about that, but I couldn't fit it into
Mm.
the book in some way. But in some, um, I mean, historically, the whole sleep paralysis, that's like the beginning of an out of the body experience and all that. So,
Right. For those who accept that idea, which you know isn't compatible with, I guess, the current scientific paradigm, but yeah, it does. What you say about puddles of consciousness? That's an interesting metaphor. Um, because it brings to mind, okay, you have puddles that they join together. You have these little rivulets. If you have enough puddles, you have a pond. And like,
mm,
how, if this were just all the result of Darwinian evolution, mindless chance over and over again, like all these things, they don't seem very adaptive. My wife is from Algeria, and in her country they have this phrase: "The cats, all of them dream of mice." It's kind of this cute catchphrase. And, you see a cat in their sleep and they're moving around, and she'll just say, "Oh yeah, the cats, all of them, they dream of mice." So you just imagine this cat dreaming of chasing mice around. Okay, well imagine like in prehistoric times, the ancestor of the cats, if they were running around acting out their dreams, like trying to chase cats and well, unconscious. Yeah, it wouldn't work out. They wouldn't be very adaptive. They'd fall off a cliff or something. But yeah, it's well, okay. What happens? The cat is sitting there, is vulnerable to predators, and it's dreaming of whatever the cat's dream of. It's it doesn't the idea just it doesn't all cohere together. It doesn't fit. Something is
mm.
missing with why dream? How is that evolutionarily advantageous? Yeah, if it's just like you're clearing your mind's data banks.
Well, yeah, yeah, that's one thing. I mean, and even, there have been, I mean, Carl Sagan a long time ago, that dates me, but he even said, oh, at some point, down the line, we will probably, outgrow dreaming and the need for sleep and things of that sort. And that's like, but that you could say that's kind of like the left brain, techno ideal. Let's get everything under rational conscious control and none of this other stuff. And then that's the whole thing. You can't do that. This is the whole history of everything I've been writing about for the last 20 something years. I mean, that book is one,
Mhm.
expression of it, but this whole counter tradition where you can call it the dark side of the mind, whatever you want to call it. It's just that it's there. It's some part of ourselves that we share. It's a,
Mm.
you know, if you talk about the left and right brain sort of thing, you know, we the conscious I, ego,
Mhm.
me tends to think I'm the sole occupant of, you know, this little, you know, kind of chateau up here. Whereas like there's a next door neighbor who's the right brain,
Mhm.
um, who doesn't speak language in the same way that I'm trying to hear, but speaks in other ways, in imagery, in body feelings, and gestures. And if it does speak in language, it's metaphoric and all that kind of thing. And that's, I would say, the source, or at least somehow the conduit, you know, the dreams, synchronicities, all the sorts of things we're talking to, comes to us. And the idea that somehow we're going to get rid of that, that would mean amputating off half of ourselves,
Right.
you know. But you know, and but the other side is like, you know, if the complete plunge into the unconscious is equally unsatisfactory. So we do have these two sides, and they need to work
Mhm.
together. And when they do work together, that's when the magic, and I mean the sense of like, you know, genius and insight and creativity
Mhm.
happens. You know, you have the, you know, the source, you know,
Right.
producing insights and intuitions, and then you have the sort of the editor, the other side, you know, the logician, you know, putting it all together into nice and into a neat package. And again, not to explain it away, but to organize.
Mhm.
I think that's what we're supposed to do. I think, you know, as you said, it's like an ever-growing map. You know, the more you sort of map out the territory, there's more territory. The territory increases as
Mm.
the more you map. Or so the what to talk about increases as the language increases. The more you have a language in order where you can start to
Right.
describe new experiences,
Mm.
then reality increases. And I don't mean it's not falsified in that sense, but it's a sense that, you know,
Right.
that's the way we grab onto it. That's the way we grab onto
Mhm.
reality is through these symbolic means, whether it's language or imagery or something like that. And then the very it's not as if it's this is the way I see it, it's not as if it's a static thing that we can finally we take like the
Right.
theory of everything. It's not like that. No, it isn't like that. It's like it increases the more we sort of go into.
Mm.
That's why they never find, you know, the bottom line
Right.
particle. It's always, you know, it's always something else. And good, keep going. You know, I mean, you know, that's
Mhm.
I would say, you know, but it's somehow we are actively involved in the increase of reality, insofar as
Mm.
we, you know, make attempts to understand it. So I would say
It's
reality depends on
explorative.
us. I say reality depends on us. It
Mm.
needs us to try and understand it more, because then it will
Right.
extend itself more. Its boundaries will extend.
Would you say we're like
And
the witnesses of it in a sense,
no, I no,
perhaps?
I no, well, witnesses, but also co-creators. You know, I mean, we think of imagination as, you know, make believe, but our imagination is actually make real. And when you think about what the term what it means to realize something, oh, I knew
Mhm.
that, but I didn't realize. Well, you knew it. You knew the fact of something.
Right.
You knew X, but you didn't really know X. What I call knowing in italics.
Mhm.
You know, you can know and you can really know something. And again, we don't have a language yet, but we know what that means. That's why
Right.
you know, I can think of it graphically as knowing in italics, you know, because suddenly it's like, you know, it's knowing, but it's a different kind. And in the
Mhm.
Hermetic or Western esoteric tradition, that kind of knowing is called gnosis.
Mhm.
It's not another Greek word, but it's different than episteme, which is another Greek word. That's the kind of knowledge you get from experiment or observation or logical thinking or reasoning out or study. But the gnosis is the kind of, let's say, gnosis is sort of rather like being very, very thirsty on a very hot day and having a very cold drink. And so gnosis is something it's an immediacy, and it's a participatory kind of knowledge. You participate with what you know. But the problem with this is that we can't communicate that in the same way that we can communicate the other kind of knowledge.
Mhm.
Nobody argues over, the formula for hypotenuse or something like that. We all, you know, but the kind of knowledge that the gnosis comes to isn't like that. It's sort of like I talk about this in my book, Lost Knowledge of the Imagination. Um, the religious thinker and logician, Blaise Pascal, and friend of Descartes. He said there's the spirit of geometry, and then there's what he called the spirit of finesse. The spirit of geometry is like, the hypotenuse triangle, whatever it is, right angle, all that kind of stuff. Nobody argues about it. It's there. It's a formula. You might,
Mhm.
they bore you to tears, but it is what it is. Whereas the spirit of finesse is something you can't quite, I mean, we talk about finesse. It's like, playing, billiards or, basketball. It's like, oh, you put that something, there's that something you put on it, which is, it's a lived knowledge. It's a kind of knowing, how should you say it? It's almost like a knowing how rather than knowing what. But it's a kind of knowledge that you can't communicate in the same way. You can't communicate the same kind of logical steps. You can lead somebody through a mathematical formula, but you can't lead somebody through. You can't explain to somebody verbally how to ride a bike. If you yeah, put your foot there and do that and do it, and if they'll fall. You show them how to ride the bike, and then they try to ride the bike, and then at some point, oh, they ride the bike, but they
Right.
can't. It's not like, oh, I have to do this, and then I do that, and then I do this, and I do this, and I do that. Whereas if yes, if you want the formula for this is you do that, you do this, and it always turns out the same. So it's a
Mm.
different knowing. It's a different kind of knowledge, and
Right.
that's a kind of knowing that is related to, I would say, gnosis. It's a kind of knowing that's related to with how the right brain knows the world, which is holistically,
Hmm.
and kind of a whole gestalt, rather than bits and pieces.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I mean, but again, we need both sides, but we wouldn't have two brains. We wouldn't have these two different ways of knowing the world if they weren't both necessary. So I
The
mean, having
Sufis
only
have a
one
term
has
for
has
that
pitfalls
makes
either way.
knowledge.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The Sufis have this term, "Dhalk," it means tasting,
Hmm.
and they use that term for that kind of intuitive knowledge. It's
Hmm.
tasting.
Yeah,
Like it
yeah.
literally means like tasting food.
No,
Not to
no, no, no. I
interrupt,
mean,
I
no,
just
you're right.
get my
It's
head.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, you're right. It's something that you do. It's a kind of experiential knowledge. It's knowledge, but it's a kind of experience. It's a knowledge that affects you in a
Hmm.
certain way, whereas the other kind of knowledge doesn't necessarily affect you. You have it, you can use it, but it doesn't. You aren't changed by the knowledge, whereas what we would call gnosis would be in some way. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be some tremendous spiritual change, but it's sort of like, oh, I didn't, I hadn't seen that before. I didn't know that kind of thing. Or, I mean, the typical one is when you see the leaf for the first time, even though you've seen 5 zillion leaves, all your life. Then one day you kind of look over, there's a bit of, raindrop in the leaf, and you look at it and it's like, oh my God, I've never seen it before. Of course you have. And again, this is the odd thing. It's like it's usually about something that you think you know already.
Hmm.
It, it's something you think you know
Wow.
already, but then you realize, oh, now I really know it. That's what I call the knowing in italics. It's a sort of,
Hmm.
and then we again we can go that's a whole tangent you can go off on, like the whole
Right.
idea that we
Yeah.
think we know everything already, and that's one of the things that prevents us from actually really knowing things. So
Right. If you don't mind my segueing, that you mentioned Jung and you mentioned this notion of gnosis that like calls to mind the subject of your upcoming book, Maurice Nicoll and Spensky and Gurdjieff. Um, and if I recall correctly, from because I wasn't familiar with Nicoll until I read about the upcoming book, he was a psychiatrist, right, or a
mm,
psychologist or a
mm,
physician
mm,
in London who followed the teachings of Freud, and then encountered the work of Jung, and then somehow encountered the work of Gurdjieff,
Mm,
and some of his teachings involve dreaming, correct?
yes, yes. Yeah, Nicoll, Maurice Nicoll, he was around this time, 100 years ago, in the 1920s. Early 1920s, he had a very successful practice, psychiatric practice on, there's a street in London called Harley Street. And it's sort of like, it's if you have a practice on Harley Street, you're doing really, really well. And he was a very interesting character because at the same time as he was a practicing psychiatrist and he was involved in the early days of psychoanalysis here in London, and then he knew Jung. He was very, very close with Jung. I mean, Jung was godfather of his daughter. And Jung actually saw him as his kind of British lieutenant. He was going to lead, the Jungian kind of movement in England.
Mhm.
And along with that, Nicoll, under a pseudonym, he was a best-selling author. A book he wrote was a hit, and it was turned into a stage production. There's even a film made of it. The film is lost. It's on the BFI, the British Film Institute's sort of list of great lost films. And he wrote for the Strand magazine, which was publishing Arthur Conan Doyle and the Sherlock Holmes stories and all that. And yes, but then what happened was that uh, Nicoll was very interested in mystical ideas, esoteric ideas, in theosophy and Gnosticism and things of that sort. And he attended a lecture by Ouspensky in London. And Ouspensky had miraculously, really, truly miraculous. I mean, his book is In Search of Miraculous, and Miraculous found him when he was stuck in a white Russian refugee camp in Constantinople, soon to become Istanbul.
Mhm.
After the Russian Civil War, the revolution in the Russian Civil War, the flood tide of all that, deposited him and Gurdjieff as well in Constantinople. And an early book of Ouspensky is called Tertium Organum, which means the third organ of thought. And it's a rather daunting title. It was actually still a rather remarkable work of metaphysics and higher consciousness and higher dimensions and all this sort of thing. It had become, unbeknownst to Ouspensky, it had become an English translation of it had come out and become a bestseller, sort of kind of new age bestseller as it was back then. And long story short, a devotee of his work, Lady Rothermere, who was the wife of the big newspaper baron here in London at the time, she found out that he was stuck in this refugee camp, and she said, "I have to meet you. Money no object, London or New York. Let me know." And Ouspensky wanted to go to London, so she sent him the tickets and the check and everything he needed, and he came to London, and he was feted, in an area called St. John's Wood, which is a rather upmarket neighborhood. And people like T.S. Eliot and Aldous Huxley and others were coming to these dinners where he was giving talks. So they wanted to hear what he had written about in this book, Tertium Organum. But in the meantime, he had come under the tutelage of Gurdjieff. And the message he had to give them was completely different, which was this very, if you know Gurdjieff's work, this very austere, demanding, notion that we're all asleep and machines and mechanical and all this kind of thing.
Right.
But he gave a series of talks also at the Quest Society, which is sort of vaguely theosophical group in London at the time. And Nicoll went to one of those, and he was electrified by what Ouspensky had to say. And he became friends with Ouspensky. He was still close with Jung at the time,
Mhm.
and but slowly his allegiance changed from Jung to Ouspensky, and he basically wrote a Dear Carl letter at one point, saying that I'm trying to explain, very understandably, but Jung was like, yeah, he wouldn't have any time for this, and he sort of broke off for the next 30 years. He broke off his relationship with Nicoll, but Nicoll became a student of Ouspensky's, and then the master came to town, Gurdjieff himself, and he had hoped to set up his institute here in London, but the Home Office wouldn't let him. They suspected him of being a Russian spy. They also suspected Ouspensky of that too. But eventually, Gurdjieff opened up his famous Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man in a chateau in Fontainebleau, about 40 miles or so outside of Paris.
Right.
And all of the students at Ouspensky, or many of the students Ouspensky had here in London, went across the channel and went to the institute, to the Priory, and Nicoll was one of them. And he went and he spent, well, I mean, probably about 6-7 months there. And I don't know if you know anything about what conditions were like at this institute. I mean, Gurdjieff was this remarkable character, but he was a demonic taskmaster. And it's the whole idea was that he generated, well, there was all this physical labor everybody had to do in the first place to get the place, livable and all that. But this was all part of a kind of meditative exercise, conscious labor. I mean, I'm just giving the quickest thumbnail sketch of it here, but the whole idea was to somehow remain aware and awake and alert of what you were doing while you were doing it. But Gurdjieff he was a master at creating inconvenience and artificial crisis. And so he put everybody through these psychological, psychodramatic ropes at the same time. So he would arrange things so people that really could not possibly get along together would have to be forced to work together, and then they would have to work on their negative emotions, not expressing negative emotions, observing themselves. The whole idea that we're sort of solidified into our personalities, a simple way of understanding it. It's a very complex system, but there's a different, and this was a way that Nicoll eventually himself, when he later went on to teach this system in London and what they call the home counties just outside of London, is the difference between what Gurdjieff called essence and personality, which you can see in Jung, the difference between, say, the self and persona. So essence is who we really are deep inside, but as we grow up, the conditions of life force us to create what we call personality, and this is the image of ourselves that we present to the world, to deal with the world, and gradually that becomes more and more, that takes over. So with Jung, the persona, the mask that the mask you put on to meet the masks, the face you wear to meet the faces that you will meet, that becomes the you. In the sense, it solidifies over you, and the whole idea is to get to the self. So similarly with Gurdjieff is to get to the essence, and he would create these situations in which your personality would be sorely tried, and so but Nicoll really went for it, and then he came back and attended I don't know, the next 7 or 8 years classes with Ouspensky, who was leading them in different parts of London, and then eventually went on to teach this himself. But you mentioned that he wrote about dreams. He did one of the earliest books about Jung's notions about dreams in English, and one of the things I say in the book about him that I did is coming out later this next month sometime. What he's known for in what's known as the Gurdjieff work, the Fourth Way, is he interpreted some of the parables in the Gospels from what he would call the standpoint of esotericism. And esotericism is basically the Fourth Way, or Gurdjieff's work. And so Gurdjieff said a lot of things. One of the things he said was that he considered his work, you could think of it as a form of Christian esotericism. Esotericism is the inner school, right, the inner meaning. So and you have Islam, and then you have the Sufism, which is the sort of inner, and you have Judaism, and then Kabbalah, which is kind of the inner. So there's the outer, the exterior, the one that's public face, and then there's so any case. So what I say in the book is the way he interprets the parables in many ways, I think, stems from how he understands dreams. And this goes back to what I was saying before, where um, dreams speak in a symbolic language. They don't speak in a literal, verbal, logical
Right.
sequential language.
Right.
But they speak a language, the language of metaphor, and it's a language of imagery and pictorial and all that sort of thing. And that's, again, I'm giving it a quick thumbnail sketch, but that
Hmm.
his book is called Dream Psychology, and that's sort of the fundamental thing that he talks about the difference between focused meaning and unfocused meaning, which is not particularly good way of talking about it. But it's the same going back to what I was saying, difference between left and right brain of understanding. So, a right angle is a right angle is a right angle, right? No
Right.
argument about that. It's very focused meaning. But
Right.
you have a poem or a piece of music or
Hmm.
someone's face. You have
Hmm.
to interpret that.
Right.
So it's unfocused in the sense that it's not tightly, that's it, bang, bang on, pinpoint
Right.
accuracy. No, it's more shifting, and you have to apply a kind of hermeneutic, we would say, which is a sort of interpretive skill. So, ooh, what did that poem
Like
mean?
episteme
What is her
versus
face saying?
gnosis.
Sorry.
Like episteme versus gnosis.
Yes,
And
yeah,
this is,
sure, yeah,
it
yeah,
will be
yes, yes,
focused.
yes. I mean, yes. I mean, some pedant might say, well, that woman, her nose is like this and it's like that, and if you add up all those things, she must be thinking about that. Oh, this is what they're going to do anyway with facial recognition and AI and all this kind of
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
That's again, all this stuff is not necessarily just
Mhm.
interesting things to talk about over tea. I think
Right.
these are real
Right.
life things. But yes, it is. It is a kind of gnosis because it's sort of like you get it or you don't.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
what Pascal would say, the spirit of finesse. It's like,
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
ooh, yeah. It's like, yeah, there's
Right.
something about that. It was, and not everybody gets it.
Mm.
Well, like a piece of music, you just hear a piece of music, say a piece of classical music, and it means something. But if you start to say, well, it means this exactly, it's like, well, no, it can't mean exactly that. It's not like that. But
Right.
but we feel something. We
Mhm.
and even you say feel, it's even visceral. There's a tactile kind of
Mm.
response to music sometimes, which
Yeah.
it moves you. So it actually
That's
does.
physical. That
Yeah, it's
that
physical,
even
but
that
then that's
phrase.
related to
Yeah.
your emotions and relates and it's related to the other part. It's not just the cerebral mind saying, "Oh, yes, again." But we don't want to chuck that out. So what we've tended to do historically is go one
So
or the
one
other,
way. Yeah.
and occasionally there's these wonderful moments where bang, that's what I call the Goldilocks effect, where it's
Mhm.
not too much, not too little, it's just right. So
Right.
it's not left, not right, it's just right. And
Mm.
it does happen. It happens in our own experience
Mhm.
sometimes and happens culturally. But um
Yeah. It does. It does, and that's. I was the title of the first book of yours that I read was called "Turn Off Your Mind," and it was an exploration of the occult and esoteric kind of like mood of the 1960s. And like it strikes me that there are cultural moments, like cultures, societies, they'll go one way, another way,
hmm,
one way, and sometimes they kind of like it's just
hmm,
right, and then one way they're a little bit
hmm,
left brain, right brain,
hmm,
something like that.
hmm. No, I think it's historically it's the case, and I would think we're reaching one of those, if we're not already in it, which we probably are, one of those junctures where and this is what that Ian McGilchrist has written about at length in his work, where his idea is that the two brains are supposed to, well, they're supposed to work together as the U.S. politics are, like a system of checks and balances with Congress and all that kind of thing. So they mitigate the excesses of the other, right?
Mm.
So if one goes too far, you kind of, you know, but what's happened, McGilchrist says, over the last few centuries is that the left brain has gained an ascendancy, a dominance, and it's it's a sort of consciousness or mode of dealing with the world that's geared towards survival. how do we deal with things? How do we manipulate things? How do we control things? And it's what got us out of the trees and sending space probes out into, who knows where. So, we need not sing its advantages, but it has disadvantages. Is that where it's able, well, it operates best by turning everything into something it already knows. So then it can deal with it already. So it makes the strange familiar. And again, I've never saw a leaf before. Of course you have. You've seen hundreds of thousands of leaves, but no, not like this, like this one, because you've just seen leaf, 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 leaf. Left brain, just we don't need to know the details. It's just a leaf. Just like you don't need to. The left brain's all tree, 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 tree. Right brain is forest. And all of that, like sort of things, like boom. So there's a kind of pinpoint accuracy that's gained at the expense of having the connection to everything else. Whereas the globalness gives you everything else, but it's all kind of hazy and fuzzy. Like again, it's unfocused. So it's all that stuff's related. So I would say a great deal of sort of the esoteric psychology is in some ways we're not rediscovering it, but we're finding, you could even say, neurological anchoring for it, and this is even something Nicoll says in some of his writing, where he would talk about, and when he died in the early 50s, and sort of split brain psychology had people had known for a long time, but it was just starting to get, people sort of starting to, work on it a lot. So it was sort of in its infancy. But the whole notion that he would say, the outer man, which he would say is the right-handed man, is the right side of the body is the outer side. Okay, now that's interesting because the right side of the body is controlled by the left brain, right? And the left side of the body is controlled by the right brain. You say, and the left side is the inner. And we know historically the left is sort of the sinestro, is somehow the darker. It's the offbeat, the left-hand path, and all that sort of thing. So whole idea that left-handedness related to the right brain is kind of like been put in the shadows by the increasingly dominant left brain that wants to make everything, it's sunny and everything's really clear, and it's a formulaic here, and there's no mystery here, and we explained everything. We just shovel that stuff on the side. In any case, I'm rambling on, but it's like, no, you just see more and more, at least I do, where themes, at least, that come up in sort of the esoteric sort of, language and tradition. You can see parallels in some contemporary, ideas about consciousness and all that. I'm going to have to drop out soon because
Yes,
I
and
can
actually,
feel
I
I'm
will.
starting to get absolutely dry.
No,
So,
this is
no,
synchronicity. I was.
thank you for letting me just
I,
ramble on. I've enjoyed just talking.
yeah,
So,
same here. It's if I don't know if you would be open to maybe revisiting this once the book is published and discussing it in more detail. But
yeah, we could do that.
it's
I can, as I
fascinating.
said, I'll pass your contact details on to the publicist and
Oh, that's too
see if
kind.
she'll send you, or she can either send you a copy of the book or send you a link to a galley, PDF kind of thing or whatever, something like that.
I that would be far too kind.
Whatever, I don't know. I'll just let her do whatever they're doing. I don't know if they're doing physical books or if they're doing those. So,
Thank you,
all right.
thank you.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, my
So
pleasure. Okay.
it's been a delight. Thank you so much, Gary, for this. I mean, I've enjoyed our conversation, and it's fascinating. And I can't wait to see the book. Maurice Nicoll. It's Nicoll.
I don't know. I've always said Nicole, and then I've heard people say Nickel, and I would think Nicole must be Cole. So maybe it is Nickel. Nicole
Oh,
somehow
Nicoll.
sounds more. It somehow sounds a bit more sophisticated, but I
Right.
don't know. Might be Morris Nicoll, so I don't know. We'll see.
Dr. Nicoll.
There
Dr.
you go,
Nicoll.
Dr.
Yeah.
Nicoll. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Oh, you have a wonderful evening. Be well, and thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care. Nice meeting you. Take care. Bye
You
bye.
as well. It's been a pleasure, and cheers. Have a good night.
Bye bye.
Right.